Welcome to another Film Friday. This week is all about developing your own black and white film at home. On the table in front of me here is everything that you need. You can see that there's really not a whole lot of kit here, and I'm going to talk you through everything that's on the table, where you can buy it, how much it costs, and how we use it. The nice thing is that everything here fits neatly into a box this size, which will go underneath your bathroom sink. Don't be keeping this in your kitchen. And you can see just how little space this takes up. You don't even need a darkroom. And on that note, I've got something to show you. From the top, let's just break down the whole process. Firstly, our exposed film goes into a light-tight tank. This part happens in total darkness. Next, we use three chemicals. A developer brings out the image on the film. A stop bath immediately stops this so that we don't overdevelop. A fixer makes our film insensitive to light so that we can safely open the tank. The final step is to rinse the film free of any residual chemicals and then hang it to dry. Let's take a look at the equipment we'll need. All the information for this is in the video description. A Pt.2 Super System 4 universal developing tank with two reels. Stainless steel varieties are available, but I like the plastic ones because they're versatile and mine's lasted me years. Two large 600ml beakers and two smaller ones, 150ml and a 45ml with smaller measurements on them. These are made by Pt.2, you can use whichever you like. A thermometer for measuring the temperature of your chemicals. Hooks for hanging and drying your film. One hook for the top and a weighted one for the bottom. A small, soft sponge. That's a pair of scissors. A dark bag, an essential if you don't have a darkroom. Three chemicals: film developer, stop bath and fixer. There are hundreds of film developers to choose from, but don't worry about which you choose. Whilst they all have a characteristic look, they essentially do the same thing. They resolve an image on the film. I'm using Ilfosol 3, I'll recommend a couple of others in the description. There are several stop baths you can choose from too. I'm using Kodak Professional Indicator Stop Bath, which changes colour when it's no longer effective. For fixer, I'm using Ilford Rapid Fixer. A word of caution about the chemicals: they are concentrated and should be handled with care. You should wash your hands when using them, and store them safely away from children. In the small dilutions we use, they can be safely poured down your sink, with the exception being the fixer. Used fixer contains silver particles and it's not good for the environment or your pipes. It should ideally be taken to your nearest photo specialist who can dispose of it safely. Luckily, it can be reused many times before you need to throw it out. That's everything. Now let's look at getting that film into the tank. The first part of this process involves getting the film from its light-tight container into a light-tight tank that we can put the chemicals in to develop it. Now that does have to take place completely in the dark. If you have a bathroom which has no windows and you can seal around the door so that no light comes in, then that's perfect. But it has to be absolutely light tight, like any light coming in from anywhere, even if it's like a charging light on your electric toothbrush, is enough to damage the film. It has to be completely pitch black at that stage for this, just for this first part. So if you've got a dark room or a room you can make into a dark room, that's fine. If you don't, then you can use one of these. This is a dark bag. Looks like a big black t-shirt. Now it's got these little armholes on the end, on each corner here, which, well, the way this works basically is that you put everything that you need, your film and your tank and everything that you need to load in there, which I'll show you in a moment, into this bag. That then zips up like this, and it folds over and becomes light tight. And you put your arms into these sleeve holes here. This feels like kind of a hazmat suit or something. And then you can do everything. You can do everything in here. You know, obviously you can't see what you're doing, but you can't in a dark room either. So this part, I'll show you. I'll show you how to do this. What you can see here is everything that you need to put into your dark bag or have ready in your dark room to load your film onto the reel, get it into the light-tight tank, ready for the next stage, which is pouring in the developing chemicals. I like to have everything laid out this way if I'm working in a dark room. That's because my wash basin is off to the right-hand side here, and I can put anything discarded like the empty film canister in there and get it out of my way. And I know that everything I need to work on is one step over to the left in this process. So the first thing that we need to do is to get the film loaded onto this reel, and I'll show you how to do that in the next step. Once the film is on this reel, it goes onto this spool, and it's important that we get that the right way around. It has this flange on the bottom, and that then gets dropped into the developing tank like this. Then our funnel goes on the top, which doubles as a light tight lid, and that latches into place. You can feel there's a very positive click as that latches into place, and you'll know it's in place because you can pick it up and it doesn't fall off the tank. So then we have a light tight tank. We can switch the lights back on and we're good. The film is safe in there. I like to put the lid on anyway. The lid is really just to make the tank watertight when we put our chemicals in there, but you know, it's just one extra step of making sure. And yeah, then we're good to go. I'll now show you how to put the film onto the reel. We're going to use this plastic reel. What this does is basically just a spiral which draws the film on in such a way that there's space around the film to allow the chemicals to wash around whilst it's still held securely in place inside the tank. The nice thing about these plastic reels is that they can be resized to use different sizes of film. Right now we're using 35mm, but if we were using, say, 120 roll film, this can be twisted and pulled apart and locked into place, and then we're ready to load 120. But we're going to set it back to 135, 35mm now, and get this loaded. First things first, you can see the film has a leader. Now this needs to be cut off so that we can load it properly. We're going to want a flat edge to get into this reel and load it cleanly. So we're going to cut this off with a pair of scissors and cut a straight edge like this. The next thing is to take our reel, and if you look at the reel, the loading mechanism is this part here at the top. There's a ball bearing on each side, and there is a tab which has a flat edge and a kind of tapered edge here. We want to have the flat edge towards where our thumbs are and the ball bearings in front. You can feel this quite clearly in the dark. It's okay. Now what this does is it works like a ratchet. You twist one side like this, and this will draw the film onto the reel. So we want to take our flat edge. Now I like to keep the film inside the canister, just because I find if I pull the whole film out, everything's kind of flapping around and it's sort of touching your clothes, or you know, picking up dust and things like that you know, we can avoid. So I like just to pull out enough of the film to, you're gonna be doing this in the dark, so you're feeling with your thumbs to this flat edge here, and kind of make sure that this is set here so that these are both in line. And then we're gonna line this up, pull the film underneath those two tabs, and just give it a head start. So we're pulling it through and pulling it over the ball bearings, making sure things go on nice and cleanly, and we've got a good start. So there we go, that is ready to get started. And now we can start to move this on, and as we pull it on, I like to pull out just a little bit more of film, just one part at a time. And you know, this part is actually pretty quick, so we can keep pulling the film out of the canister and pulling this round. So we're holding the left hand side still and rotating the right hand side, or the other way around. If you're a lefty, it doesn't matter, as long as you get the motion right. And you can feel if this is going well. Now this is, if it starts to get bunched up or it feels like things are getting a bit tense and stiff, nothing should be forced. This should happen, like, it should be really fluid and it should feel easy. If something's going wrong, then you know, it's best just to not force it, pull the film off and just start over. Because you know, what can happen is that the film can get kind of bunched up. It might be touching itself inside here, in which case it's not going to, the developing fluid's not going to get to it properly. So you can tell if it's going on cleanly. The other thing we want to make sure is that this is completely dry before we do this, because if this is wet or has any kind of moisture on it, then that can cause problems as well, and it can kind of jam up. And yeah, Okay, so we've got to the end of our film. You can feel when that's happened because it's no longer coming out of here. Just cut the end off. That can get tossed in the sink. And then just pull a few more turns on. And you can see this is now ready to be loaded onto the spool, which is our next step along. Goes onto there with the flat base here. And this now gets dropped into our developing tank exactly as we did earlier. This funnel lid goes in, lock it into place, lift it up to test it. That is now light tight. Our lights can come back on. When we need things to be watertight, this lid goes on, push down firmly, positive click, that's now watertight. If you're doing this in a dark bag, it's exactly the same procedure. It's just going to take a little bit more practice because you're feeling around in there. You're going to get there with practice. One thing I would suggest with your scissors, buy a pair that has a blunt nose so that you don't risk piercing the bag, which would render it useless. These are a little bit pointy. If you are using pointy scissors, just be very careful. We are now ready to prepare our chemicals. All three come as concentrates that require diluting with water. To get our mix measurements and ratios right, we're going to use an app. Massive Dev Chart makes this process so simple that I'd call it an essential app. We tell it our developer brand and film size, and it gives us our measurements and a timer. Without the app, you can use the web version, but let me show you just how simple it makes this process. Right, so we're going to develop a roll of Pt.2 120. This is a 400 ISO film, and we're going to use Massive Dev Chart to get our formula mix and our times. So we'll launch it. The first screen you'll be greeted with is just showing you, these are formulas that I've used before. If it's the first time you've used it, then there will be nothing on this screen. If you look at the top right of the screen, you'll see a plus sign. You click on that, and that asks us what film we're going to be developing and what size. So in the top here, you can see the size of the film. I'm going to put it 120. It's Pt.2, so we'll scroll down to the Ks. You'll see there's all kinds of different films here. Here we go, Pt.2 400. And now the next step is to punch in what developer we're using, which is, in my case, Ilfosol 3. Again, you can see there are hundreds of developers here. Yours is going to be on here somewhere. So let's have a look. Ilfosol, let's get to the eyes, Ilfosol 3. It's given us two different options here for two different ratios. I like to tend to use the weaker ratio. So you use less developer, and that tends to lead to like finer grain as well. There's a bunch of options here depending on whether I've shot this film at a different speed than the box rating of 400 ISO. I don't tend to do that a lot, and I've shot this at 400 ISO. So let's hit that, and you'll see the new formula appear at the bottom there. So if we click on that, that then takes us to our developing stage. So at the top, it just confirms everything we've just entered. The next indication down there is showing us our formula mix. One part developer to 14 parts water. And if we click on that, you can see it's showing us that we're going to need, for a 120 roll of film, we're going to need 500 milliliters of total mix at 1 part to 14, and it gives us our final mix in milliliters below that. So you can't go wrong. Like whatever your 35 millimeter 120, it's going to tell you exactly the measurements you need. And if we go back to here, you can see it gives you the time as well. It's going to take 12 minutes at 20 degrees centigrade to develop this film correctly. So that's it. So when we're ready, we'll mix up the formula now. We'll go ahead and do that. And as soon as we pour it in, we'll click start. That will start our timer going. And you can see at the bottom here, it's got the three important things, are the top three things here: development, stop bath, and fixing. So as soon as we click start, it's going to start our 12-minute timer. Well, we'll follow it through and I'll show you exactly how this works. Right, we're now in my bathroom, which is doubling up as my darkroom. I've got everything set up so that I can feel for it in the dark, because this does get really tricky once you put the lights out. And yeah, this is the stage that needs to happen in the dark, getting your film from the light tight roll into this tank. After you've done that, then everything else you can do with the lights on, which makes things much easier. So yeah, I like to have the sink, I clear everything out of here, toothbrushes, all of it. I don't want chemicals anywhere near any of that stuff. So start clean and then clean it all down at the end, and yeah, it's a good way to go. And also you're not fiddling around with lots of other clutter in the room when you're trying to get this done. So yeah, I've got my film. Where's my film? Here's my film. Okay, so I've got my everything set up so I can feel for it. I've got my reel. I actually pushed the spool into this already so that I don't have to. It's one less thing to have to fumble around for. I'm going to take this off this reel, put it onto this one, drop it into here, and then this goes on. And once this is on and locked in, you can hear it lock in, and you can lift it up. You know, then this is light tight. One thing, don't forget to put the spool in. I've done that before, and if you don't have the spool in, then that isn't light tight when you close it. So yeah, that's an essential part of this, and something I have forgotten before, so I've learned from that mistake. Lid on the end here. I'm going to mix up my chemicals after I do this, just so that the temperature stays even and I don't start to have a change in temperature as I'm kind of fumbling around doing this. And yeah, okay, I'm going to do this, but I need darkness, so I'll see you. Right, the part that I need to do completely in the dark is done. The film is in the tank, which is now light tight. I've got the lid on just because I like to keep it on while I'm doing other things, although you don't need to. That only needs to be on when the chemicals are in and we're doing the developing part. So the next step is to take developing formula and get the mix right. So we're going to look at massive dev chart. We made our formula earlier. So there we go, massive dev. So we're looking at ilfosol 3, 1 to 14. We need to pour out 33.3 milliliters of this formula into the smaller measuring beaker here with the more accurate reading on it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. .3 is very specific. I think we can give ourselves a tiny bit of leeway on that. Just get it as close as you possibly can. There we go. That's pretty accurate. Okay, yeah, now that's ready to pour. The next thing we need to do is get our water into the bigger beaker at the right temperature. Now for me, I have mixer taps in my bathroom, so now I've done this a few times, it's easy for me to know where to put these to get them roughly right and then just tweak it. I can look at the thermometer as the water is pouring on it and get that right. If you don't have mixer taps and that doesn't work for you and you kind of don't want to use that much water while you kind of experiment, there are other ways to get the temperature right, and we'll look at that after this.
Actually, I'll pause video and tell you now. If this method proves imprecise or you don't have mixer taps, simply run water into the beakers that's too warm and submerge them into a bucket of iced water. It's quicker and easier to bring down the temperature of warm water than to try and bring up the temperature of cold. And with practice, you'll learn to get to 20 degrees in no time.
So let's start by pouring getting just a little bit of hot to come out. Just want to hit that magic 20 degrees. Once we've hit this, I'm just going to fill up both of those beakers so that we've got like 2 full beakers to work with, and then we can pour out what we don't need. Okay, we've hit that sweet spot. It's time to fill up both those beakers. Now I've cleaned these out, like at the end of the last job I did. It's always important to rinse and clean everything at the end so there's no residual chemicals from your last job. Get into good habits. First off, I'm just going to mix up my developing formula, and then as we're doing that, as we get into the developing, we can mix the stock bath up a little later. So those are good to go. I know that from my massive dev chart, I need, let's have a look, it's 466.7 milliliters of water, which is very precise. But we can use another beaker to so that we don't have to put this down the sink and then start again with the temperature. I like to kind of pour off, get the bulk of it close first, and then use the smaller beaker to get it exactly right. So
466.7, let's get that right. Where are we at the moment? Up the top there. Okay, that looks close enough. I mean, with this, you don't want to sweat too much over those small decimal points, really. I mean, it's very, very forgiving developing black and white film. You could be quite a long way out on this and, you know, you would still get a good result, but it's a good idea to get into good practice. Try and get as close as you possibly can and keep consistency. That's the key thing, I think. Every time you do this, you want predictable results. You don't want to be guessing what's coming out. So, yeah, that's pretty close. So what I'm going to do now is to pour in my developing fluid, and I'm going to use the thermometer to give that a stir. Should have a stirring paddle really, but this is okay as long as you're careful with it. Some different developers can be a little bit syrupy and some come as a powder, so you want to make sure this is fully mixed. If you have a powdered one, I'd recommend having some kind of spatula or better device to stir with, but that's good. Give that a rinse. Now, I like to have a couple of towels handy. The phone, if you're using your phone for a timer, just put that away from everything else so that you don't spill anything on it. And yeah, these things tend to be pretty watertight, but they will leak a little bit, so it's good to have something just to kind of clear that up as you go. So yeah, we're good to pour this in. Let's get our massive dev chart. As soon as this is in, we're going to click on start. So we're kind of ready there. Pour it in. And start. Now we're going to agitate this for the whole of the first minute, and you can hear this ticking away. When it makes that ticking noise, it's asking you to agitate, which is basically just using this little agitation stick which slots into the spool inside there and allows you just to twist this back and forwards. What this is doing is it's keeping fresh chemicals washing against the film at all times. Now that just makes sure that you get even predictable developing on this. Move 40 seconds. This is going to be a 12-minute job, so I will at some point soon just fast forward through this. But yeah, what it's going to get me to do is basically agitate once every minute. There we go, that little pip means we can stop. Put the lid on. There's different approaches to agitating your chemical mix. Some people like to kind of turn the whole tank upside down. The little animation on the dev chart thing there is actually, that's the way I used to do it, but if you're really aggressive with your agitating and you're getting kind of washing it around in there the whole time, it's going to give you crunchier, more pronounced film grain. Whereas if you're a bit more gentle with it and you don't want to see that in quite such a pronounced way, then you can just use the stick, or you can just pick this up and yeah, just turn it. I'll show you what I'm going to do with it. 10 seconds. So I'll just put the towel over the top there. Okay, so all I'm going to do is just turn this like this. I'm not going to turn the whole thing upside down, just give it a good wash around in there. And then, that's important, after you've done that, just tap it down on the work surface, and that will relieve any bubbles that have formed in there, which can cause problems if you leave them. Actually, what I did mean to tell you was, while I'm doing this, I'm going to mix up my stop bath, so I'll show you how to do that. Now the stop bath is telling me that it wants 16 milliliters per litre as a dilution. Hang on, I've got a agitation coming up. Okay, 16 milliliters per litre. We know that we need 500 milliliters altogether to go into this tank. This doesn't need to be that accurate. The one you need to be most accurate with is the developer. That's where the important the important reactions are happening. This is just stopping that reaction dead so that it cuts out that developing. So we want to have, what did I say, 16 milliliters per liter. So we're looking at 8 milliliters for 500, yeah, just under 500 milliliters of water. So there we go, that's about right. Oh, another agitation coming up. It's quite handy that it has these audio cues, because you can kind of just wander off, do some other things, as long as you wash your hands. So we just want 8 milliliters of this. This stuff's pretty stinky, but it's not, it's actually not that bad a chemical. It's basically just kind of vinegar. Okay. But it is gonna stink up your bathroom a little bit, so make sure you have the doors open, your ceiling fan on. Okay, I'm gonna rinse this out. Okay, we're getting pretty close to the end of the cycle here now. I've got, we're at 11 minutes of 12. So we've got one more 10-second agitation to do. About 30 seconds before the end of your developing time, you can pour the developer out. You can find out if your developer it's reusable. Some of them are. I tend to like developers to use like fresh each time, just small dilution, fresh each time. This one is how I'm using that. So at this dilution, it's okay just to pour it straight down the sink. So we're at 30 seconds away from developing. That's going to slowly just pour down the sink. Okay. And then when our alarm goes off at 12 minutes, we can pour in our stop bath. The stop bath is going to require 1 minute of constant agitation. In goes the stop bath. As soon as that's all the way in, click on your timer there. Constant agitation for the whole minute, and it will just tick you through, and the alarm will sound at the end. Now, yeah, everything else that happens from here on is not particularly sensitive to temperature. The only place you really want to make sure you're spot on with the temperature, or as close as you can be, is using your developer. That's where like a few degrees either side of that 20 degrees can make a big difference to the amount of time it takes to process your film and the results you're going to get. So we're nearly there. Okay, that's your stop bath done. Because that's a little bit stinky, I just like to run the taps on it for a bit. Right, we've poured away our stop bath and we're ready for the next step, which is to use Fixer. The stop bath is stopping all of the chemical reactions happening so that the film's no longer developing. The next step is using Fixer, which Fixer makes it so that the film is no longer sensitive to light. Once we've used this dilution for 5 minutes in the tank, our film, we don't have to worry about, like, we can then take the lid off this and go into those final stages knowing that our film is not going to react to light anymore. Okay, so firstly we need to mix this up. It's telling us 1 part of Fixer to 4 parts water for the dilution. I've already gone ahead and mixed some of this up, but if you're using it like 500 milliliters, you'd use 100 milliliters of this to 500 milliliters of water, and then you're good to go. I tend to mix this up in like 1 liter batch. Because it's reusable, I can tend to use this for like 10 or 15 different films, and it's fine. So you want to constantly agitate for that first minute, and then after that you can go ahead and put the lid on, and it's just again 10 seconds every minute after that. It doesn't really matter like how much you pour in there. it's just you want to put enough in there to cover the film. 500 milliliters for a roll of 120 is fine. If it's a bit too much, then that's okay, as long as it's not overflowing. And yeah, I can finish this off and see you near the end of this. Right, the fixer's poured back into my litre bottle there, and we're now just ready for the final rinse. There is a stage, it says on the massive dev chart here, called hypoclear. That's not something we need to worry about. We're just looking at final wash, and it's telling us our final wash should be 10 minutes and 30 seconds, which is very precise. On the Peterson tank information, it tells us it should be half an hour. I think really that's a long time to be rinsing, unless you have some kind of system where you can constantly wash through without wasting water. I tend to, in all honesty, just put this underneath the tap in the bath for about 3 to 4 minutes. The first minute I'll just kind of dunk it up and down and just let it, rinse it as much as I can, then just let that run. And I think that's always been fine for me. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do that now and just leave that rinsing. While I'm rinsing it, I'm gonna wash all of my beakers, wash my hands and the surfaces. And yeah, once that's done, I'll get back to you and we can hang this and see what we've got. All right, now that has been rinsing away underneath the bath tap now for about 5 minutes. That's as much as I'll ever do. So there is one final step which I haven't talked about, which it wasn't part of my workflow to start with, but I find this helps. It's not essential, but this is so cheap to use that it's well worth picking up. It's called photo flow. And what it will do, it works in a tiny dilution. So just at the very end stage here, it says 1 part to 201. So I mean, you're really just using almost like an eyedropper amount in the water, and it just prevents your water from streaking and drying on the film in such a way that it will leave marks. It helps it to kind of evaporate, and yeah, I just find it gives me none of those little drying spots that I used to get, particularly if you're in a hard water area and you're kind of leaving your film to dry with water spots on it. It's one less thing to have to deal with in post to get rid of. So like literally the tiniest bit of this. So this one bottle will last you years. And we can go ahead and you'll see it kind of bubbles up a little bit like detergent. Give that a good turn. Just make sure it's kind of, I just left some of the water from the running taps in here. So once that's done, we can shake that off. Okay, let's go ahead and pull that out. And now we're ready to pull this off the reel and see what we've got. Okay, this is always a kind of interesting moment of truth. Looks like I didn't get a few on my exposure at the end there. This was a half-used film. So we've got a bunch of stuff on there though. That's good. We're going to use our film clips to hang this. So these things actually punch holes in the film to hang it to dry. So we'll put one in the top here. Okay. And then we're going to hang this. I just use one of the hooks from the curtain rack on the shower, hang it on that. And then I've also got these weighted clips. These clamp onto the bottom and they keep the film taut. You can see it already wants to curl up again. So putting that on the bottom makes sure that it dries completely straight. Also, I'm going to use a sponge with a little bit of this formula. I'm going to dip it into here and just squeeze this off so that there's almost nothing left on it, and just gently run this down each side of this. Now, ideally, you'd be using tongs with sponges on them and just gently go down it just to make sure there's no kind of obvious water streaks or bubbles on there. You don't want to use the tongs that have the rubber squeegee kind of thing on them because they can scratch your film. They degrade over time and they can leave marks on your film. I'm just going to be really careful and use the soft side of this sponge to go up and down the film here because I don't have any tongs at the moment. And yeah, we're going to get the bathroom a bit warm. it helps your film to get drying more quickly if you run the shower or the bath for a little bit, get some kind of steam built up in it. Also, that helps to prevent dust settling on the film. So I find if I get the room warm, get it dusty, get it kind of like a little bit of a sauna in here, put this on, hang it up, and then just leave it for really a couple of hours. You'll know when it's dry. It won't be tacky, it'll be completely dry, and we can come back and take a look at that once it is. When your films are fully dry, you can cut them and you can put them into these archive sleeves. Now, you can buy these in any photo store. I'd suggest cutting them into 6s if it's a 135 film, and to 3s if it's a 120 roll film. Makes it easier to scan, and they fit nicely into these sleeves. Yeah, really, I mean, how long did that take us? Just over half an hour, and that was with me talking to you about how everything works. You can get this down to maybe like 10 or 15 minutes of film for some different types of film. Also, you can double up the films on these spools and get even more out of that time. In future episodes, we're going to look at different types of developer and why you might choose a certain one based on a look that you like yourself. But we'll get into that later. Next week, we're going to look at scanning, so we can make digital files from these negatives and have those ready to edit and share. I hope you enjoyed this week's show, and next week, yeah, I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for watching.